Hey guys, tonight we paddle softly through morning mist, drifting low across the still surface of Lake Chocomilco. The water is mirror calm, holding the glow of sunrise like a secret it doesn't want to spill. Your hands rest lightly on the oar, and your breath comes in slow clouds. Somewhere in the reeds, a duck you've seen exactly 37 times before is side-eyeing you like it owns this lake. Spoiler, it does. But you're not here to argue with ducks. You're here to float and survive. And maybe, just maybe, find out what water lilies and floating gardens have to do with breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your city and local time in the comments so I know when and where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before the sun. Not because you want to, because the water demands it. There's something about living beside a lake that keeps your body tethered to rhythms other people sleep through. The birds are up. The frogs are composing something important. And you're getting in your canoe. It creaks under you as you step in, balanced like a spoon on the edge of a bowl. You ease into the seat. Your paddle dips once, twice. The sound is satisfying, small splashes against a lake that still remembers yesterday. To your left, a wall of reeds. To your right, another chinampa, someone's floating garden, sleepy in the haze. Ahead, breakfast. Sort of. You glide gently along the canal, following the same path you've taken since you are old enough to steer. The mist lifts in waves. The water lilies blink awake. You pass a fisherman pulling up his net, eyes bleary but hopeful. He waves with 2 fingers. You nod back. You could take the long way around, but you don't, because today you want to see the lilies. They bloom early, pink, white, yellow, like someone whispered the sun's name into the water. You pause, you drift, and for a moment, everything is perfectly still, except the hummingbirds. They arrive like glitter with wings, fast, bright, entirely unimpressed with your existence. One hovers above a blossom the size of your palm. Another zips past your ear like it's in a hurry to deliver gossip to the gods. You smile. You've seen this before, but you'll never stop watching it, because this is the world before the work begins. Before you tie up your boat, before you plant or harvest or sweat through your tunic, this is the part no one talks about. The quiet, the floating, the lilies. Your paddle rests across your knees. The catfish are still asleep under the surface. You lean back slightly and let the current nudge you toward the far edge of your plot. Historians still argue whether chinampas, these floating gardens, were true islands or more like raised beds built into the lake. But you know better. You stand on one nearly every day. It floats the way a promise floats, firm but flexible, rooted and restless at once. You reach your plot just as the sun finishes climbing out of the clouds. The edges are marked by willow trees, thin, tall, purposeful. Their roots hold the garden in place, like fingers pressed gently into the water's skin. You tie off the canoe, step onto the soil, feel it give just a little under your feet. It smells like warm mud and plant ambition. Everything here is alive. Your breakfast grows a few paces in. Not eggs, not bacon, just a small patch of amaranth, crimson stalks with seeds finer than sand. You pluck a few heads, shake the grains into a cloth. You'll toast them later. Add them to a cake of maize and squash, and whatever you didn't forget in yesterday's basket. But first, you stretch, arms over your head, eyes closed, breathing in what the lake gives you. There's no clock, no schedule, just you, the lilies, and the expectation of effort, because nothing grows without it. Not here. You check the canal for water level. Still high. Good. You check the leaves for pests. One beetle. Flicked. You check the sky for clouds. Clear, but don't trust it. Then you sit, just for a moment, on the edge of your chinampa, legs dangling above the water, toes teasing the lilies. And you think about how this place survives. Not just you, but the garden itself. The city nearby depends on these floating plots, quiet rectangles of layered mud and woven branches that feed thousands without being seen. It's always the hidden things that keep the world spinning. Like roots, like seeds, like you. You lean forward, press your hand into the damp earth, and feel the give of it, the quiet sponge of lakebed and silt and composted leaves that didn't ask to be useful, but became so anyway. The chinampa doesn't creak under you. It simply adjusts, rising slightly with your weight like it's been waiting since yesterday. This garden floats, but not like magic. It floats like memory. You take your time, tracing the edge of your plot with a slow walk. The willows bend slightly above you, their leaves rustling in wind that hasn't made up its mind yet. The water laps against the woven reed barriers holding the garden's shape. You stop and tug at one corner, straightening the edge with a practiced flick. It feels like brushing hair. Chinampas begin as nothing. A patch of shallow water. A plan. A gamble. First you build a frame with logs and reeds. You anchor it with willow poles, knowing they'll root themselves in time. Then the layers begin. Mud from the bottom of the lake, decaying vegetation, more reeds, more mud, a sort of lasagna that smells faintly of eggs and perseverance. You shovel carefully, laying mud in soft, generous slabs. It's thick, black, and alive. Worms twitch inside it. Beetles scurry. You nod, approving. Historians describe chinampas as artificial islands, which is technically true, but artificial feels wrong. There's nothing fake about a system that holds together a floating city. It's not pretending to be land. It is land, just slightly more ambitious. You kneel and plant maize first. Always maize. You poke a hole with your finger, drop in a kernel, whisper a word your grandmother used to say. Not a prayer exactly, just a murmur, a reminder. You cover it gently, then another, then another. The maize will take its time, but it always comes, tall, golden, a little proud of itself. You'll make cakes with it, Tuck it into steaming bundles. Dry it on the roof. Feed the ducks with the leftovers. And if it's a good year, you'll trade it at the Tenochtitlan market for chocolate or a new clay griddle. But not today. Today is for planting. After maize comes beans. You place them beside the corn shoots, not too close, but close enough to lean on them later. Beans climb. They hold nitrogen. They tell the soil, I remember what it needs. You like that about them. Then squash. Last but never least. It spreads. It wanders. It asks questions no one answers. Squash does not stay in its row. It blooms yellow-orange like it's always performing. Its leaves are huge, like gossip with a green stalk. But it's food. It fills space. It hides bare soil from the sun. You plant a few. Not many. Just enough to feed the next week. This combination, maize, beans, squash, wasn't invented by you. It's older than your bones. Older than the city. A trio called the Three Sisters, although they bicker like cousins and require more maintenance than your canoe. Still, they feed you. Still, they grow. The garden doesn't talk back, but it listens. You feel it under your knees, the pulse of soft resistance as your fingers press each seed into place. A toad watches from the corner. You nod. The toad blinks. This is your team now. You pause mid-row and wipe your forehead. The sun has climbed, still soft, but insistent. The water nearby glints like someone spilled silver. You hear a canoe pass behind the willows. A woman singing. A child answering in bird calls. You smile. Then you return to the mud. You plant more. Chinampas don't sleep. Even when the planting's done, the work continues. You weed. You shore up the sides with new reeds. You scoop more mud from the bottom of the canal, warm, thick, and forgiving, and spread it like frosting over the topsoil. Sometimes you forget where the land ends and the lake begins. That's the point. This isn't a farm. It's an agreement. Between water and will. Between sunlight and timing. Between your sore back and your hungry belly. You hear your stomach grumble. The garden does not apologize. You sit back, stretch your arms, drink from a gourd, and look around. You've planted enough for today. The sun has nearly finished its climb. The ducks are starting their late morning politics. You can hear them bickering near the lilies, kicking up sprays of water like they're writing your name in curses. You'll eat in a moment. Maybe a squash cake. Maybe something you left buried in the coals last night. Still warm if you're lucky. But first, you just breathe. You sit in your garden. Your floating, muddy, green-spattered miracle of persistence. And think, this didn't have to work. But it does. It works because of patience. Because of practice. Because someone, long ago, looked at a lake and thought, what if we grew something here? And someone else said, we can. You eat crouched on the edge of the chinampa, your feet hovering just above the canal water. It's a squash cake, predictably flat, flecked with seeds, slightly charred on one edge, and perfect. You didn't pack it. You buried it. Last night, in the coals at the base of your hearth, wrapped in damp leaves and wishful thinking. It's still warm. You break it in half, steam escaping into the mid-morning air like a whispered confession. You take a bite. It tastes like smoke and sweetness, and almost enough. A hummingbird darts past your head again, probably the same one from earlier, or its cousin. They move so fast they could be dreams. You watch it dip low over the lilies, wings a blur, a high-pitched buzz that fades before you've finished chewing. You stretch your legs, watch the water ripple. You consider going back to the house, to check on the stored maize, maybe turn the compost pile. But the canal calls you, not with urgency, just with familiarity. You climb back into the canoe, this time without the usual grunt. You balance your paddle in your hands, and you drift. Because sometimes farming means floating. The lake is calmer now, the morning breeze having run out of clever ideas. Your chinampa disappears behind the reeds. You pass another, this one newer, still uneven around the edges. Someone's effort, not yet proof. You nod at it like an old aunt assessing a toddler's drawing. You keep drifting. Around the bend, you pass an elder. He's got a hat made of palm, and the kind of canoe that looks like it might collapse into the water out of pure spite. But it hasn't. Not yet. He lifts a net from the canal, checks the catch, grunts softly, and lowers it again. You drift past. He does not speak, but he sees you. The canal opens wider ahead. You turn slightly, past a pile of floating lilies, until you reach a garden that's different. It's not yours, but you know it. Amaranth tall and proud. Chili peppers in tidy rows, their leaves twitching with the slightest hint of wind. Watercress in the shallows, bright green and trembling. And the lilies, dozens of them, opened wide, yellow and white and soft pink, resting like they own the lake. You glide closer and stop. This chinampa is more than a farm. It's a palette. Colors bloom here more deliberately. The peppers are in perfect columns. The maize leans just so. There's a pathway through the middle, lined with flat stones someone bothered to clean. You feel mildly insulted. This is your neighbor's garden, the one who waves too much, the one who pretends he's humble, but names his ducks. You tie up your canoe and step out. You don't call for him. He's probably somewhere adjusting a vine or composing a poem to his frogs. You just want to look. Quietly. His amaranth is ahead of yours. Taller, a little smug. You reach out and pluck a few grains. He won't mind. Probably. You chew them slowly. They pop slightly between your teeth, nutty, clean, and more than a little satisfying. Historians talk about maize and beans like they were everything. But amaranth was pride food, festival food, something you grew to say, look at me, I understand beauty. You crouch beside a row of marigolds, not for eating, for offering. He's planted them along the canal edge, their orange blossoms spilling like fire into the water. A few petals drift loose, carried off toward the city like a tiny, floral procession. You think, what a ridiculous man. You also think, I should do this. You take a step back, nearly trip over a gourd. You pick it up. It's still small, the size of your fist, but perfect. Round, speckled, ready for carving or drying or cradling, until you forget what it was for. You set it down gently. You paddle home. Your own chinampa waits, a little more crooked than you remembered, but yours. You pull weeds, adjust the willows, check for ants, and you plant marigolds. Just a few, just near the edge. They'll take. They always do. And tomorrow, you'll float again. You'll drift past gardens and gossip and ducks named after gods. You'll sip amaranth broth and think about how lucky you are to know the flavor of soft-spoken survival. Because that's what chinampas are. Not miracles. Not magic. Just patient rectangles of mud and hope that hold up everything. And in the meantime, you'll keep growing. Even if your squash is flat. Even if your neighbor writes poetry about his chili peppers. Even if your canoe leaks slightly near the back. Because your breakfast grew out of a lake. And that's more than enough. You wake before dawn the next morning, not out of discipline or divine inspiration, but because a duck is screaming. Well, honking in the general direction of chaos. But the sentiment is the same. You shuffle to the door of your hut, eyes crusted, hair leaning in one direction, and find the usual suspect, your neighbor's duck, the one with a name longer than some noble lineages, floating by your chinampa and announcing the morning like it's been appointed town crier. You nod at it. You do not thank it. The sun hasn't even finished yawning, but your garden's awake. And today's job, compost. You sigh, because while everyone loves a floating garden in bloom, amaranth waving, lilies poised like royalty, no one talks about what keeps it all going. Old leaves, duck droppings, crushed shells, half-eaten maize cakes, and a stubborn belief that rot is the start of life. You grab a woven basket, already stained with time, and step onto your chinampa. It bobs slightly, greeting you like an old friend who needs something. You start by checking yesterday's heap. Still steaming, still cooking, still mildly offensive. You lift the top and stir it with a stick, not your best stick. This is the compost stick. It has seen things. The smell punches you with the confidence of fermented ambition. You inhale, not deeply, just enough to feel it in your eyebrows. Historians note that chinampas were astonishingly productive, multiple harvests a year, thriving without modern tools. What they often forget to include: the smell, the flies, the damp corners of the garden where last season's mistakes go to be reborn. You scoop the newer compost, darker, crumblier, less aggressive, and begin layering it between the rows. First the maize, then the beans, then the squash, which has already escaped its assigned boundaries and is currently embracing the nearest willow tree, like an over-enthusiastic guest at a party. You let it be. Chinampas aren't about control. They're about encouragement. You sprinkle compost along the base of your chili peppers and whisper a small apology. You forgot them last week. They haven't forgiven you, but the new soil will help. You pause to rest your back. A heron watches you from across the canal, unmoving, judging. You point to the compost. This is noble work. You mutter. It blinks. You carry on. The cat appears then, as she always does when the work is half finished. She walks across the chinampa like she was born to balance on floating land. She sniffs the compost, gags dramatically, and promptly disappears into the squash vines. Respect. You shift to the edges, where the water creeps close, and the soil tends to slip away if you're not careful. You dig in some old reed clippings and lake muck, thick as pudding and twice as suspicious. It squelches beautifully. This is the part no one paints in murals. The part where survival is made of leftovers. The part where your hands are stained with yesterday's peels and tomorrow's dreams. You spread compost like a promise, like memory, like you trust that this rotting mess will one day be a flower, or a squash, or a bowl of stew that makes you sigh instead of wince. You pause again. Listen. The duck has stopped honking. The water is still. A dragonfly hovers above your head, then lands on the compost stick. Brave soul. You watch the light shift. The lake glows a little. You feel useful, not accomplished, not triumphant, just part of the rhythm. You finish your route. The basket is empty. The soil is full. The garden smells like potential and something vaguely alarming. You wash your hands in the canal, careful not to let the cat push you in. Again. Then you sit at the edge, barefoot, legs swinging above the water, and unwrap your breakfast. A tamale, still warm, stuffed with beans and yesterday's amaranth. Not fancy, not large, but yours. You eat slowly. You think about how this chinampa is made of borrowed time and borrowed soil, about how it shouldn't work, but does, how it feeds a city and doesn't ask for applause. And you think, maybe I'm the same. Floating, layered, compost-powered. You chew, swallow, smile. The cat returns. You offer her a bite. She declines. You both sit and watch the sun rise again. By mid-morning, the lilies are wide awake. The sun is stretched high, and the lake's stillness has turned glassy. You drift once more, paddle loose in your hand, coasting past petals, so pale they catch light like porcelain. Bees hover between blossoms, busy but unbothered, the only creatures here with more chores than you. You slow the canoe near your neighbor's edge, not to visit, to forage, because today is Amaranth Day. You spot the stalks easily, tall, magenta, too confident for their own good. You remember planting your own a little late this season, distracted by squash vines that refuse to mind their business. Your neighbor's plot is overflowing. You consider this. Alone. You reach out, pluck a head heavy with seeds, and nod toward the house on the shore. No one emerges. That's as close to permission as you're going to get. You keep drifting, because floating is, in its way, part of farming. Chinampas are not always walked. They are approached, quietly, sideways, with reverence. Your own plot is waiting. The squash is surly again. One vine has lassoed the canoe post, like it's staging a coup. You untangle it with a sigh and a pat. It fought well. You step back onto the soft earth. The garden adjusts beneath you, shifting slightly, as if remembering your weight from yesterday. You set your basket down, and begin collecting flowers. Not the ones you eat, the ones you give. Marigolds, bright orange, fragrant in the way memory is. You cut them near the base. Lay them gently into the basket. They'll go to the canal shrine later. Place there not because you believe in every god whispered about in the city, but because you believe in giving something back to the water. Historians argue whether chinampa farmers made regular offerings, whether ritual blended into routine. But you know there's no line between what you do for food and what you do for thanks. You pause by the peppers. They're small, unapologetically red. You pluck a few, fingers careful. These are the ones with a temper. You've made that mistake before. Rubbed your eye while cleaning peppers and spent half the afternoon regretting your life. Lesson learned. Your squash are finally behaving. You gather 3, all round and stubborn. You hold them up to the sun like they might laugh at you. They don't, but they seem pleased. Back in the canoe, you balance your bounty. Flowers, peppers, amaranth, squash, and steer toward the far canal. You're heading to market, or at least your market, a short, muddy dock where a handful of neighbors gather to trade gossip disguised as vegetables. As you paddle, you pass others doing the same. Canoes laden with tomatoes, beans, cress, ducks tied to the back, baskets full of tamales for sale, still wrapped in leaves and ambition. You dock gently, step onto the planks, wave to the weaver who always pretends she doesn't see you. She's holding a bundle of wool dyed with cochineal, red as a festival morning. You trade her squash. She doesn't smile, but she takes it, which is her version of friendship. You move on. A boy tries to sell you frog eggs in a jar. You say no. He says they glow in the dark. You still say no. He shrugs and tries someone else. You trade amaranth for soap, peppers for salt, marigolds for nothing, just a nod from the old man with the aching knees. You leave them beside him, and he murmurs something about good water and better dreams. You sit for a moment under a woven awning, sip cactus fruit juice from a clay cup. It's warm, sweet, slightly gritty, like joy you didn't expect. You think of the lilies, still blooming, still floating, still pretending the city doesn't exist beyond the reeds. You finish your drink, tuck the empty cup into your basket, and paddle home. The water is quiet now. Midday silence. Everything breathing in. You dock. Step back onto your chinampa. Unload your trades. Peppers onto the shelf. Soap beside the basin. Salt in a clay pot near the fire. And flowers, fresh marigolds, rested beside the altar of broken clay that sits by the canal's edge. You light a stick of copal. The smoke curls upward like a vine, twisting, slow. You sit beside it, cross-legged, tired, proud, and think, this is how you survive a city made of water. One flower, one pepper, one quiet paddle at a time. You rise the next day to find your chinampa sighing in the mist. Not literally, of course, but the reeds lean, the squash vines droop with that soft end-of-season slouch, and even the water feels slower, like the whole lake is pressing snooze. You stretch your arms overhead, hearing a crackle in your spine that sounds a lot like your canoe when it's overfull. The cat meows loudly. She's already perched on the corner of your roof, tail flicking, eyes fixed on a heron wading through the canal like it owns every fish and half the sky. You suspect they've been arguing since before sunrise. Today, you're staying on the chinampa. No market, no foraging, no neighborly duck drama. Just you, the garden, and the quiet thrum of things growing, because the truth no one says out loud is this: the garden never stops. Even when you do, you begin by checking the night's traps. Small, woven baskets lowered into the shallows, left half submerged near the reeds. You tug one up, just lakeweed and disappointment. The second yields something better: a crayfish, 2 eels, and a frog who is clearly offended by the situation. You release the frog. You thank him for his time. The crayfish and eels go into a clay bowl, sloshing softly. They'll keep until lunch. You walk the chinampa slowly, trailing your fingers across tall stalks, brushing bugs from the beans, picking up loose marigold petals from the walkway. You hum, without realizing it. Not a song, just something that sounds like belonging. You scoop up fresh lake mud from the canal, dark and squelchy. Spread it along the rows. Your garden drinks it in greedily. Chinampas live off this mud. It's what makes the floating land more than just a raft of dirt. It's renewal. Historians talk about the genius of the system, how these gardens replenish their own nutrients, how they create a loop of production so efficient that even centuries later, agronomists still nod in appreciation. But they never say what it feels like to press your hands into the same lake bed your ancestors stirred, to know the harvest that feeds you came from decay and dusk and patience, to feed the soil and feel it feeding you back. You find the patch of watercress, toss them in your bowl with the crayfish and eels. Lunch is beginning to form in your mind. You check the chili plants. The smallest ones are ripening into the dangerous shade of red that says, use with caution. You pick 2, just enough to give the stew a spine. You gather a few amaranth leaves, young ones, tender, slightly nutty when cooked right, and finally, a handful of wild onion shoots, because you like them, and because they're there. You return to your fire pit, half sheltered from the wind, ringed with old stones, familiar as a friend you never quite visit enough. You start the fire with flint and dry leaves. You set a pot over the flames, add water, salt, the chopped shoots, the chili, bruised slightly for drama, the amaranth, the watercress. You clean the crayfish and eels with practiced hands, rinse them in a gourd of canal water, and drop them in. The scent rises fast, rich, savory, unmistakably lake-born. You stir gently. Watch the bubbles rise. Sit back and breathe. The cat returns. She sniffs the air, sits precisely out of reach, and begins grooming her shoulder as if to say, I'm not impressed, but I am intrigued. You share none of your lunch. She glares. You eat slowly, savoring the balance, the sweetness of amaranth, the sting of chili, the salt of eel, the peppery crunch of watercress. It tastes like effort and reward, and knowing exactly where your food came from, not a shelf or a store or a stranger's field, but your chinampa, your hands, your water, and that makes it better than any feast. You finish. Wash the bowl with a splash from the canal. Let it dry in the sun. Then you rest, on your back, on the soft edge of the garden, staring up at a sky that seems surprised to be so blue. You count herons. You doze. You dream of vines and roots and floating earth. And when you wake, the garden is still there, still growing, still waiting for you. Afternoon sunlight rests lightly on the water like a cat across your lap, warm, steady, unmoving unless disturbed. You blink up at it, eyes crusted from a nap you didn't mean to take, and hear the faint rustle of your chinampa shifting beneath you. Not enough to throw you off balance, just enough to say, you fell asleep on the job again. The cat is gone, which means something nearby smells edible. Probably your neighbor's chili pile again. You sit up slowly, stretch your arms, and consider your next task. Today, it's the nets. Fishing in a chinampa system isn't just something you do, it's something you rely on. You never set out to become a master of aquatic gossip, but when you live in a city of lakes, canals, and floating gardens, protein comes with gills, claws, or opinions. You grab your coil of netting, woven from maguey fiber, patched with reed, tough as your grandmother's old sandals, and untangle it slowly. A heron watches you from a wooden post. It tilts its head, unimpressed. You paddle to your usual spot, a slow bend in the canal, half hidden by water hyacinths and good intentions. The water here is shallow, soft, and slightly mischievous. You lower the net. No bait, no tricks, just patience. While you wait, you watch. Small fish dart under the lilies. Tiny bubbles rise from the silt. You see a crayfish sidestepping dramatically through the reeds like it's late for a meeting. You smile. This is the part of chinampa life that rarely gets mentioned, the quiet, the parts between planting, harvesting, bartering, the silence that isn't empty but resting. After a while, you tug the net back up. A few fish, one small eel, a freshwater snail that seems deeply offended to be here. Not much, but enough. You paddle back, the canoe heavy with potential. At home, you clean the fish quickly. Scale, gut, rinse. You save the bones, always. They go back into the soil, or into soup, or into the shrine, if you're feeling ceremonial. You think about the way nothing here is wasted. Not the fish, not the water, not even time. Because even when you sit in a boat, doing nothing but watching dragonflies land on your knee, something is always growing, always building toward the next meal. You smoke the eel, dry the fish, slice the snail for stew. You leave a few sprigs of basil at the edge of the water, a tiny gift to the canal spirits. You don't know if they care, but it feels polite. Historians still debate whether Aztec chinampa farmers lived comfortably. They talk in yield numbers and trade values, but you think they've never sat with a warm eel on a cool evening, watching lilies close themselves like secrets. You tidy up. Check your traps again. This time, you catch nothing. And that's okay. Because you've already had enough. Not feasted, but enough. You remember a time when you hadn't. When a week's worth of hard work netted one waterlogged squash and a handful of bitter beans. When your hands bled from the nets and your knees ached from kneeling too long. Now, you're stronger, smarter, and still floating. You sit at the edge of your chinampa, legs in the water, eel hanging over the fire on a stick you carved 3 weeks ago and haven't named yet. You watch the light go gold. You listen to frogs tuning up for the evening concert. The cat returns, of course. She eyes the eel. You give her a nibble. She acts like it wasn't worth the wait. You both know it was. You eat together in companionable silence. Then rest your head against the trunk of a willow tree planted generations ago to hold the garden in place. Its roots are underwater, but it doesn't mind. You don't either. Evening drapes itself over the lake like a shawl woven in twilight and wood smoke. The sun lowers its voice. The herons finish their shift. Somewhere nearby, a canoe slides homeward with the last of the chilly harvest, and a very wet duck that clearly didn't plan its exit strategy. You light your fire, not for food. You've already eaten, not for warmth. The etanite is mild, resting between seasons, but for company. The fire cracks, sings softly. You sit beside it with a clay mug of something warm, cacao, thinned and gently bitter, whisked with a carved stick until it frothed just enough to feel ceremonial. Not a feast, but it makes you feel like you're part of something older than the city. You sip slowly, the way you'd listen to a long story from someone who speaks in metaphors. And in this moment, chinampa life slows from function to feeling. You place a few marigolds by your little shrine near the edge. Not a full offering, just a hello, a nod to the canal spirits, the soil gods, or maybe just your ancestors who knew better than to plant without asking the lake first. The cat watches from a reed basket like a furry magistrate. She's full from eel and judgment, purring like a temple bell. Across the water, you spot a flicker of light. Another fire, small and flickering on the next chinampa over. You know who it is. Your neighbor, the one with the obnoxiously symmetrical amaranth and the overambitious watercress. The one who once claimed his beans, sang in the rain. Tonight, he's singing, not loudly, just enough for the wind to carry pieces of it across the water. You don't recognize the tune, but it fits. You lean back. The willow rustles above your head. Historians write about temples and trade routes. They document tribute lists and royal speeches, but they forget to record moments like this, the gentle competition between neighbors who count harvests in handfuls and measure wealth in how many lilies grow along their shore. The fire dies low. You refill your mug. You pick up a reed mat and unfurl it near the shrine. You're sleeping here tonight, not inside, not away, but with the garden, because the chinampa isn't just your field, it's your home, your bed, your pantry, your cathedral of quiet. a floating patch of earth with just enough space for roots, dreams, and one slightly overconfident cat. You lie back. The stars are bright. The lake holds still. And slowly, the day lets go of you. You drift between sleep and awareness, toes brushing the soft woven edge of the garden, hands tucked beneath your head. You think, tomorrow I'll check the squash, replant the basil, sharpen the paddle, but not yet. Tonight, you're still. You breathe in the smell of soil and smoke and wet lilies, and think, this is the part they won't remember. Not in the books, not in the accounts, but it's the part that kept the city alive. Not the speeches, not the armies, the gardens, the floating quiet, the soft song of water moving between rows, the patient hands that planted before the sun rose and slept beside the beans. You close your eyes and sleep beside the breath of the lake. You wake to mist. A low, silver fog has settled across the canal like a secret. Everything is quiet, damp, slow, suspended. The garden is still asleep, or pretending to be. The fire's gone out, leaving behind soft grey ash, and one perfectly toasted stick that looks suspiciously like the cat's tail was involved. You sit up slowly, reed mat creaking underneath you, and stretch toward the sky. The sun hasn't committed to rising yet, but it's trying. Pale light pushes faintly at the edges of the fog, making the lake look more like a dream than a place. You paddle slowly this morning. No rush, because today is delivery day. A harvest of amaranth and squash, a bundle of herbs, mostly for trade. Some marigolds, always useful, even if no one says exactly why. You stack it carefully in the canoe. Tie everything in bundles with old fiber cord. Add a few small maize cakes, wrapped in banana leaves, because market days are long, and you never trust your memory when hunger is involved. The paddle dips. The water parts, you move. Floating between chinampas, you pass other early risers. One woman arranging chilies in a reed basket, bright and aggressive like they know their hot stuff. Another hauling water from the canal in a jug larger than her torso. A boy singing off-key to his ducks. Tenochtitlan rises ahead of you, not abruptly, but like a page slowly turning. The towers and temples gleam in the soft light. The markets begin to stir. Even the birds seem to know something important is about to happen. You dock at the trader's landing, tie your canoe with a double knot. Your last one came loose during a windstorm, and you spent an hour chasing it down a canal like an irritated crab. The market greets you, not loudly, just a slow hum of cloth being unfurled, canoes being emptied, voices warming up like musical instruments tuning for commerce. You carry your goods to your usual spot, a flat patch of stone near the chili vendor and the woman who sells fish that may or may not still be moving. You lay out your amaranth first, arrange it nicely, then the herbs, then the squash. You do not arrange the marigolds. You let them spill over the edge of the basket like they've made their own decisions. Soon people come. A man trades you a wedge of cheese for 2 handfuls of greens. A child offers you a carved bead in exchange for a squash. You pretend not to notice when she sneaks a flower too. You smile anyway. The day passes like water through fingers. Slow, gentle, inevitable. You eat one of your maize cakes. Drink cool water from a gourd. Watch a group of dancers rehearse a ceremony across the square. They're wearing masks shaped like eagles and jaguars. They move like rain clouds, deciding whether to stay or go. You trade your last bundle of herbs for a dried fish wrapped in woven reed. It smells like memory. You pack your things slowly. The sun has reached its peak and then gone on without you. You paddle home, basket lighter, but heart full, because this floating trade, this quiet exchange of effort and earth, is how your chinampa speaks to the world. Not in monuments, not in songs, in produce. You dock, unpack, hang the fish in the smokehouse, feed the cat a bite. She pretends it isn't good. You know better. You sit at the edge of the garden again, feet in the water, back against a willow tree that's held your secrets longer than your memory. And you think, this garden feeds more than mouths. It feeds motion. The paddles, the trades, the unseen rhythm that kept the empire alive. Not loud, not glorious, just steady. Like you wake with dirt in your fingernails and a frog sitting on your canoe paddle. It blinks at you. You blink back. There is an understanding. You both go about your day. The sky is overcast, but it's the kind of overcast that behaves. Just enough cloud to keep the sun from scorching your squash, not enough to ruin your laundry plans. You gather your tools, a hoe made from polished wood, a small reed basket, and your sense of cautious optimism, because today is a planting day. You check the canal first, its level, its color, its mood. The water is high and dark and sluggish. A good sign. The garden will drink well. You kneel near the northern edge of your chinampa, where the last of the old bean stalks cling to the willows like children who've overslept. You clear the beds gently, humming as you go, tugging out the remains with a twist and a prayer. You pile the leftovers, withered stems, used leaves, broken vines, into a compost heap. The smell is personal, but you've learned to appreciate it. Nothing good grows without decay. You plant carefully. Beans. Again. They know this soil. They've been here before. Each seed is pressed into the mud like a secret. Each row spaced with the kind of precision that comes not from measurement, but from memory. Then squash. You tell it aloud. This time, stay in your row. It won't, but it's good to set expectations. You walk the length of your chinampa, checking every corner, every curve. The floating land responds to your footsteps, adjusting with a soft give, like it remembers every harvest, and is mildly insulted that you haven't brought food this time. You pause to admire your maize. It's taller than you now, golden tassels reaching skyward, like someone's trying to ask the gods a question. You brush your hand over the stalks. They rustle back. You think about how this system feeds not just you, but thousands. How this quiet patchwork of mud and willows and soft labor supported Tenochtitlan. City of canals, city of songs, city of fire-lit markets and towers sharp against the sky. Historians marvel at its efficiency. But standing here, knee-deep in morning and water-logged soil, you marvel at its kindness. It gives, and never raises its voice. You return to your canoe, paddle out to check your traps again. Today's catch: 3 small fish, 2 snails, and a clump of aquatic weeds that looks like it wants to be soup, but isn't quite there yet. You set the fish aside for drying, the snails for trading, the weeds for the compost pile, or, if you're desperate, for the ducks. You wash your hands in the canal, let the silt settle, watch your reflection waver. You're sunburnt, a little stooped, smudged from forehead to ankle, but you're well, not thriving in the way nobles describe it, not rich in gold or titles, but in continuance, in knowing that the beans will climb again, that the squash will sprawl, that the maize will sing when the wind leans the right way. You pull a tamale from your basket. It's wrapped in leaves, slightly cool, but still soft. You eat with one hand, steering the canoe with the other. The cat jumps in from somewhere. You both nearly fall out. You scold her. She ignores you. Balance restored. You pass another chinampa. The owner waves. You wave back. Their amaranth looks smug. You're mildly offended. It's fine. You reach your home plot again. Retie the canoe. Water your flowers. Whisper to the herbs. Brush dirt from your tunic and tuck a flower behind your ear, because survival doesn't exclude joy. The garden doesn't demand thanks, but you say it anyway. And then you sit once more at the edge of your floating world, feet in the water, eyes on the lilies, and you breathe. Today begins with paperwork, not the kind with quills and stamps, the kind that involves a man in a wide hat rowing toward your chinampa with an expression like he's been sent to inspect your soul, and will probably tax that too. You sigh, because it's agricultural inspection day. You consider hiding, but your chinampa is very much floating in the open, and it's hard to vanish when your garden has marigolds the size of small suns, and your maize looks like it's training for battle. You stand near the dock with your arms crossed. The inspector arrives with a scroll, a checklist, and a personality carved entirely out of dried beans. He nods once. No smile. He begins. First, the boundary check. He walks the edge of your chinampa with a little measuring rod, poking the reeds like they've personally offended him. He hums disapprovingly at a crooked corner. You say, the ducks knocked it loose. He writes something on the scroll. Next, the soil depth. He stabs a stick into the mud and watches how far it sinks. Not far. You're proud of that. He does not look impressed. He makes a note. Then the crops. He counts maize stalks, measures chili plants, lifts a squash like it owes him rent. He says, "You've got more than you declared last season." You raise an eyebrow. "I also lost more to frogs." He scribbles anyway. Historians don't often mention the bureaucratic side of chinampa life, but it was there, like mildew. Taxes, counts, tribute obligations. Floating gardens might seem like freedom, but the empire always knew how many squash you owed. He moves to the canal traps, finds your snails, finds your eels. You say nothing. He makes a mark beside aquatic resources. You wonder how many boxes it takes to reduce a life to numbers. The inspection ends with him pointing to a form you'll need to file next week. Something about surplus, which is funny because you've never once felt like you had more than enough. You watch him paddle away. Slow, steady, smirk. You wave with your less polite hand. Then you get back to work, because a garden doesn't pause for bureaucracy. You tie up the willows that shifted in the last rain. You harvest more amaranth. You bury compost along the squash roots with a sort of tender vengeance. And as you kneel there, hands muddy, knees sore, you think about what it means to be measured, not in weight, but in value. The inspector saw numbers. You see marigolds. You see chili stalks that lean together like old friends. You see a patch of wild cress that wasn't there last week. You see enough. You paddle to the market later, trade a few herbs, give away a few more, pick up some gossip. A neighbor overplanted, another underreported. Someone got fined 3 bundles of maize and a ceremonial chicken. You buy cactus fruit with a smile. Sweet, sticky, bright. You eat half before you get home. You let the juice run down your chin. You don't report it. Back on your chinampa, the sun is dipping low. The lilies have curled in for the night. Even the cat is yawning. You light a small fire. Set a pot to boil. Throw in greens, beans, the last of the fish, and enough chili to suggest you're still feeling rebellious. As it simmers, you think, they can count your stalks, measure your soil, tax your harvest, but they cannot measure this. The way the air feels as the stars emerge above the canal, the exact weight of silence when the wind dies down, the taste of stew made by hands that chose to keep planting. You eat, you sigh, you rest, and the garden, quiet, floating, stubborn, stays with you. You wake to flowers, not in your bed, though that might be preferable, but all over your chinampa. Marigolds, mostly. Some open wide like trumpets, others just beginning to bloom, curled like secrets. You didn't plant this many. They've spread, as marigolds do, with the cheerful disregard of someone crashing a party, and then helping clean up after. The cat sits beside one patch, eyes half closed, tail swishing in time with the morning breeze. She does not like marigolds. You suspect they smell too much like effort. You crouch near the edge, basket in hand, and begin to gather. Today is not for vegetables. Today is for flowers, for offerings, for color. You pick carefully, stems long, heads full, petals unbruised. You've done this before. For neighbors, for shrines, for the little temple tucked beneath the willow tree, where someone left a feather and 3 beans last week. You don't ask questions. You just add your marigolds to the growing pile. Historians often skip this part of agriculture. They talk about calories, storage, yields. But flowers, they see those as decoration, a footnote, something for ceremonies. They forget that marigolds also keep pests away, that some flowers are edible, medicinal, that petals can be dried, burned, brewed, offered. They forget that sometimes the soul needs feeding too. You carry the basket to the far end of your chinampa, where the water is clearest. There's a little dock here. Nothing official. Just a plank and some willow poles. And a clay bowl where offerings collect. Old petals, faded coins, a carved shell, a joke someone left written in charcoal. You set the marigolds down. Not all of them. Just enough. You light a bit of copal. The smoke curls around your fingers, up into the trees, out toward the city. You close your eyes and breathe. You do not speak, because some prayers don't need words. Later, you visit your herbs. Basil, epazote, oregano. They grow in quiet corners, tucked between chili stalks and shady beans. You pick a few sprigs for drying, rub a leaf between your fingers. Inhale its story. You remember your grandmother planting these, saying, "This one for your stomach, this one for your breath, this one if someone wrongs you, and you need to bake about it." She wasn't wrong. You stop by the water lilies next. They're floating contentedly, half open, pretending they didn't just host a family of ducks for breakfast. You pluck one, gently. You don't always do this, but today feels like a lily day. You paddle to the temple canal, a longer route, quiet and winding, lined with gardens that have stood for generations. You pass a man singing to his squash, another woman waving away bees from her chili blossoms. No one hurries. No one pretends this work is small. You reach the temple dock. Step off. Tuck the lily into a crack in the old stone wall, just above the waterline. It will float later. Someone will see it. Maybe the gods. Maybe not. But someone. You paddle home lighter. Not empty. Just settled. The marigolds by your hut are blowing petals into the canal. The cat's asleep again, her head pillowed on your sandal. You sit by the edge, steep some herbs in warm water, and sip slowly. The sun moves gently. The day, like a boat, floats by, and the flowers remind you, not everything that grows must feed the belly. Some things are here for the heart, for beauty, for memory, for no reason at all except that they can. By mid-morning, the chinampa is awake in full color. The squash blossoms have opened like sun-soaked trumpets. Bees bob from one to the next, performing a quiet ballet. You pull weeds with one hand and flick mosquitoes with the other. Neither task done in anger, just part of the rhythm. You hear the paddle before you see it. A soft clunk-clunk against a hollow log canoe. You look up to find your neighbor drifting toward your edge, standing like a statue in his boat, arms crossed over a basket. Oh no, he's brought gossip. You tie off your bundle of herbs and pretend to focus on your chilies. He drifts closer. Your squash vines are trespassing. He calls. You glance down. They are deep into his corner, curled around one of his ducks. You shrug. They're ambitious. He steps ashore without waiting for an invitation, sets down the basket. Inside, 3 maize cakes, 1 mango, and something that looks suspiciously like a poem written on bark. "You're not supposed to be this successful," he says. You raise an eyebrow. Everyone's talking about your amaranth. You resist the urge to smile. He continues, walking your chinampa like he's inspecting it for a mural. You used to overwater. Now look at this. Structured bean rows. Spaced maze. Flowers placed like sentences. I got tired of chaos. Hems. Well, now you're making the rest of us look disorganized. You hand him a chili. He eats it without flinching. A sign of respect. The two of you sit on the edge of the chinampa, feet in the canal, watching your squash tangle itself with his. Remember the year the lake flooded? He asks. You do. Everyone does. The rain came fast. The chinampas bobbed wildly. Half the crops drowned. The canals overflowed. And in the middle of the mess, someone's canoe floated past with 6 ducks and 1 very confused cat. Your garden survived best that year, he says. Only because I planted uphill. There is no uphill. We're in a lake. You shrug. He leans back. My brother says you talk to your plants. Your brother once traded his sandals for a bean cake. Fair. Historians rarely note the social life of chinampa farmers. The jokes, rivalries, borrowed tools, and the passive-aggressive gifting of superior chili varieties. But here, your neighbor is as much a feature of your life as the water or the maize. You offer him a tamale. He takes it, offers you the mango. It's slightly bruised. You pretend not to notice. The two of you eat in comfortable silence. Above you, a dragonfly hovers. The cat returns from somewhere, muddy and triumphant. Your neighbor leaves after an hour, claiming he has important work to ignore. You wave him off, paddle flicking gently behind him as he disappears into the maze of canals. You turn back to your garden. Squash, beans, marigolds. You pluck 3 overripe chilies and hang them to dry. Later, you take the mango peel and place it by the little shrine. An offering. A joke. Both. The chinampa breathes under you. Soft, slow, unconcerned with your neighbor's visits or your dreams of becoming a floating garden philosopher. You dig your fingers into the earth. Still damp. Still rich. You think, this is friendship. This is farming. This is what it means to survive with people, not just beside them. You pick more herbs for trading. Check the traps for fish. Retie the squash vines. Now planning a slow invasion of the walkway. The cat curls in the basket. You rest in the shadow of your tallest maize stalk. And somewhere across the water, your neighbor is probably telling someone you fertilize your plants with secrets. You don't correct him. Not today. You wake to weather. Not rain. Not yet. But something in the sky has shifted. A heavy breath pressing down from the mountains, dragging clouds behind it like a reluctant herd. You squint at the horizon. Dark. Still distant, but coming. Storm. You step out barefoot. The garden meets you with silence, the kind that suggests it, too, is listening for thunder. Today is preparation. You tighten the ropes that anchor your chinampa, not because it will float away. The willows have done their work well, but because it might think about it. And you're not in the mood to negotiate with soil. You check the rows. The maize stands tall, tassels swaying. You whisper encouragements under your breath, like a general inspecting their troops. The beans need propping. The squash, as always, has made poor life choices and now clings to the side of the canoe post like a poet during monsoon season. You unwind it gently, reroute it, promise it more compost if it behaves. The canal has risen half a hand's width overnight. Not bad, but not nothing. You pull reeds, pile them at the edges to stop erosion. Dig new channels along the walkways, small paths for water to run, rather than gather. You've learned the hard way. Pooling water is never helpful. It pretends to be rest and becomes rot. The cat avoids you entirely today. She perches in the hut doorway, dry and smug, as if to say, some of us have sense. You let her have it. You cover the compost heap with woven matting, stake down the drying chilies, move the herb jars off the windowsill. The wind is rising. Historians marvel at the ingenuity of chinampas, how they thrived in flood-prone environments, how they bent but rarely broke. But they forget to mention the work, the pre-flood rituals, the calculations of mud versus water versus wind versus luck. You row to the city quickly, while the light still holds. Trade squash for dried fish, amaranth for oil. You don't linger. Everyone is moving faster. Canoes loaded higher. Markets closing earlier. Eyes skyward. On the way home, rain begins. Not a roar, just a whisper of what's coming. The first drops kiss the water and vanish. You pull your hood close and paddle faster, basket tucked behind your knees. You reach your garden just as the real rain starts. It comes hard, straight down. No wind yet, just volume. The kind of rain that presses your shoulders, seeps into everything, finds the weak places and pokes them. You light a fire quickly. Keep it low, under the eaves. Dry your hands over the flame. Shake out your sleeves. Listen to the world go wet. The cat is already asleep. The maize rustles in the dark. You eat a fast dinner, chili broth, squash cakes, water warmed over coals. It tastes urgent, but filling. Outside, the storm builds muscle. Wind joins in. The chinampa shifts slightly beneath your feet. You go out once more with a torch. Check the moorings. Reinforce a willow post with a second rope. The lake breathes heavier now. The lilies are gone, folded in tight. Even the herons have vanished. You speak softly as you work. To the beans, to the maize, to yourself. You say, you've survived worse. And it's true. You return to the hut. The torch smokes in the corner. The walls hold. You wrap yourself in the reed mat. The cat shifts to your side. The storm will last through the night, maybe longer. You don't know what will greet you in the morning, but for now, your garden is anchored. Your plants are fed. Your hands are tied in the right way, and as the thunder rolls across the lake, like a god reconsidering everything, you sleep. The storm ends before you're ready, not with drama, not with sunlight slicing the sky or thunder cracking open the world, just a long pause between raindrops that never ends, and a quiet that settles into the mud like an old blanket. You wake slowly, blink once, and listen. No wind, no splashing, just the soft creak of waterlogged reeds and your own breath. still fogging in the cool morning air. You step outside barefoot. Your chinampa is still there, still floating, a little tilted, a little soggy around the edges, but alive. The maize held. The squash vines look scandalized but intact. The beans, defiant as always, have wrapped themselves around your compost stake like they meant to do that. You smile. Not a big smile, just enough to remind your face how. You walk slowly, checking each row. The canal water is high, brown with stirred-up silt. A fish surfaces briefly to look at you, then dives back down, unimpressed. The heron has returned to its favorite post, feathers puffed against the chill. Even the cat has emerged, stretching like the storm never happened, inspecting the damage like a forewoman with very high standards. You begin the morning's work, not to repair, really, just to settle. You tug a few plants upright. You spread new mud where the water stole topsoil. You untangle one stubborn vine from the edge of your canoe. And then, finally, you sit, cross-legged on the still wet earth, a squash in your lap, and you breathe. You don't need to do more today. You've earned stillness. You make breakfast from what's left. Toasted amaranth, a warmed tamale, slices of chili-flecked squash, soft and steaming. You eat slowly. You watch mist rise from the lake. You think, this was never meant to work. A floating garden, an anchored dream, soil piled on branches tied with hope. But it does, because it listens, because it flexes, because it knows how to rest without giving up. Historians still marvel at how chinampas fed a city, how thousands of people thrived off floating rectangles of mud, how maize and beans and squash and marigolds flowed from the lake like quiet abundance. But they miss what it feels like to stand on a garden that moves, to harvest your breakfast with your feet wet and your sleeves rolled, to survive, not by force, but by rhythm, by patience, by floating. You finish your meal, tuck the seeds away. You'll plant them again. Of course you will. That's what this life is. Not grand, not loud, but returning to the soil, to the water, to the same spot where your hand meets the earth and your hope takes root again. You sweep the chinampa with a bundle of dried reeds. You collect a few petals that survive the storm. You offer one to the canal, not for luck, not for the gods, just for balance. The cat watches, tail flicking. She's ready for lunch. You are, too. But first, you lie back, arms stretched wide, sun now peeking through the clouds like it's checking if the damage is over. And you think, I grew this. I kept it. I floated, and it fed me. Wind down 300 words. Now, let the lake go quiet. Let the ripples still. Let the lilies uncurl, soft and slow, reaching for that returning sun like nothing ever fell from the sky. The storm is over. The mud has settled. And the garden, it breathes with you. Feel the weight leave your shoulders. The paddle is set down. The vines are tied. The compost waits patiently in the corner. Nothing urgent. Nothing loud. just the soft rhythm of growing things. You lie back on the earth, chinampa beneath you, moving gently with the water. It cradles you, not hard, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to rest. The cat curls by your feet, her purring low and even. The wind plays with the edge of your sleeve. A dragonfly passes by, trailing a little thread of light. You close your eyes. The lake holds you. The garden keeps you. You're still here. And that's everything. So sleep now, chinampa farmer. Let the city wait. Let the maze rise without you for a little while. The stars are coming. The fire is out. And your garden, anchored in mud, memory, and 1,000 patient seeds, is floating gently in the dark. With you. Safe. Quiet. Fed. End of script. Sweet dreams.